Ready.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the New Charlotte Town Council work session meeting for Wednesday, May 4th, 2022, 7 p.m. I will call this meeting to order at 7:02. I want to thank everybody for coming. We've dedicated this work session to the discussion of housing. The purpose was to get ideas out there, let you guys all know where the town is at this point, how we're going to move forward. As a note on the agenda, there's quite a few topics here. Maybe welcome your comments on any of them, we can stick to the point. If there's anything on that agenda that you'd like to tell us after that, I'll certainly give you time at the end of the meeting to do that. But I like to stay focused on the items at hand, and that's about that. If anybody would like to speak, I would ask you to step up to the microphone so that the people listening on YouTube can hear your thoughts and comments. So with that, item number 1 is to review preliminary results of the housing survey produced by the Town Land Use Development. I'll give that over to
Hi, everyone. So I'll provide a summary of the results that have been, responses that have been received thus far. So the town posted on Survey Monkey a survey that was focused on year-round residents, the housing needs for year-round residents. And it's been up for about 2 weeks now, and we received 28 responses so far. It was posted on the Block Island Bulletin Board, in the Block Island Times, as well as the town's the homepage of the town website. So far, I feel like it's provided some valuable information, and I want to thank those who have provided a response. So some interesting household statistics from those 20 responses. 6 are currently living within employer-owned housing. 4 identified themselves as being town employees. There were 8 households that had children under the age of 18, for a total of 11 children within those 28 households. There was 1 need for a disabled housing unit. There were 7 households needing at least 3 bedrooms. There were 10 of the 28 households that said rental is probably a better fit than home ownership for their families or themselves. 20 were below area median income, that 100% threshold. There were 9 that said that they would like to be at $1,000 a month or less for rental costs. There were 2 questions that focused on the year-round, what they call it, like Block Island shift, right? The 12 said that their rental is not currently year-round. So another question had 40% saying that their current housing requires them to relocate seasonally. 3 were above the 140% AMI, so that's where would be considered attainable housing and not eligible for some of the deed-restricted housing units that are being developed. 9 live with another household due to a lack of alternative option. 5 live in a housing unit that they feel is not affordable within their current means, within their current budget. And there was overall an even split. There were 2 questions that spoke to the preference or the need for rental versus home ownership. And there was a pretty even split. So again, that was out of 28 responses, and we'll leave it open in case there are more individuals or families that want to reply, and then we can provide, we can summarize the results again in a couple weeks, or we can determine that date, whatever is appropriate. So we're hopeful that some of the projects that are currently in the pipeline, such as Block Island Housing Board's the Paul O'Brien property, and potentially the Thomas property having 4 513s potentially there. That's a total of potentially 20 estimated build-out units that could fulfill the housing needs of some of, hopefully many of the respondents of this survey. The town also has a map of town-owned properties that we could further refine and look at to prioritize some some properties that the town may want to put more housing units on, 513s in the future. If we could identify a funding mechanism for that, but we could certainly come up with a plan and a priority for some of those town-owned properties. So a couple months ago now, we had a housing forum and we talked about how the comprehensive plan has the town's strategies and policies for affordable housing. So I'd refer anyone to that document if you want to take a look at that. A lot of the topics that are on the agenda, are already policies that the town has in place and want to implement. We also discussed key sections of the current zoning ordinance that relate to affordable housing. So such as section 405 that provides a pretty generous density bonus for affordable housing, up to 4 times the number of units for nonprofit developers such as the Block Island Housing Board. And then I know this is coming up next on the agenda, I won't get too far ahead, but section 513 is another key section of the zoning ordinance that I'm sure everyone here is familiar with. That's been getting a lot of discussion recently. So that I'll just introduce by saying that those are allowed by right as an accessory use, currently 2-bed, 1,200 square foot maximum. The town has permitted approximately 50 of these units across the island, and the planning board is currently exploring some amendments to section 513 to potentially make it a little more flexible and potentially encourage more units to be built. There are also other amendments recently submitted to the town council for section 513 that the planning board will be discussing next week on Monday and Wednesday, the 9th and the 11th. It's on the planning board's agenda to review those amendments, draft amendments that were submitted to the town council and referred to the planning board. So we'll certainly be happy to take any comments from the council or the public tonight to the planning board, or you're welcome to attend those meetings if you have recommendations on section 513 and how it could be improved. But I know that's a couple agenda items to talk about 513, so I don't want to get too far ahead of the agenda.
Just a quick question. Not so quick. When you look at the plat maps where town-owned properties are identified, do you have some sense, just sort of offhand, which ones would be sort of good targets for affordable housing?
Not necessarily based on the plat maps, but just the plan for those properties, right, and the future use. So we have the overlook, obviously, that was just recently acquired, and harbors, having there's in the fire farm. So like when we know that in the future, when a town facility, a new facility is going to be built, that could be a policy, right, to then incorporate housing units within that municipal facility because they're there building and those obviously those functions require employees.
So a month or so ago, we were talking about potential for an idea of doing, for example, 99-year ground leases on property for residents that develop restricted housing, affordable housing. One of the things that I don't know, I reference the plat maps because I looked at the materials that you put together for the town housing group, and I'm wondering, if, we can ask you or you and you and Jen and or you and Jen and a few others to sort of come back to us soon with a list of those, plat and lot numbers that you think we should be looking at. Is that something that we could theoretically deploy pretty quickly? And for my money, also ought to be, we also ought to consider lots like that for perhaps even more enhanced density when that's appropriate. So that you can, for example, do an affordable ownership and a rental 513 on a town lot, for example. You know what I mean? Sort of really kind of identifies those spots for where you might be able to squeeze a couple of living units in, or a duplex, or, you know, something like that. But I don't feel like I have, and I don't want to speak for everybody else, but I don't feel like I have the expertise to sort of say, oh yeah, that red spot looks like it might be good, because I don't. But given, I think that the community feels like we need to do our best on the things that we can do quickly, that seems like one of them that ought to be at the top of our list. So if you or you and a couple of volunteers wouldn't mind looking at that and coming back to us soon on that, that'd be very helpful.
Sure, yeah, a short list. We have several years back, we had a kind of like map of town and properties where housing could be developed. I know the council had recently recirculated that. So that's where I think we were talking, Mary and I, like about just further refining that, and coming up with a recommended top priority ones that were more feasible than others. So we can certainly do that.
That's so far outside of my expertise, you know what I mean? It may be that if I chose nine of them wouldn't make any sense, but my bet is that you and Jen and, you know, just you and Jen, whatever, however you decide to do it, probably have a good sense that these are five where you could really do something, or four, or 14.
And now the council having recently adopted, readopted that subsection of 513,
Yes.
now we know it's more feasible, right? So
Exactly.
we can take that next step. It's just property funding, right, for all those potential units.
We're working on the funding piece, but that, sort of interacting with state government is something that we're all doing and are prepared to do more of. And I think there's at least some initial traction there. But one of the things that I think has become clear to us, I think you guys would agree, is that being ready has value, because they're gonna appropriate some of this federal money. And the people I think who are most likely to get it, other than, people with a lot of legislators from their district, are gonna be people who have, on these 5 lots, we want to do X. And here's what we think it's gonna cost, and here's, so I think being ready with some sense of that would be.
I agree, Keith. Thank you. I'll reserve a comment on that until we get further on the list. I want to stick to the survey right now. I want to stick to that on the agenda. About the survey.
Allison, thank you. The goal of the survey was trying to figure out how many units are needed, now sort of how to set goal. And my question really gets to be, how do we go back out, get more responses, number one, and so you develop that. But then who can you work with to figure out how to extrapolate the number? So let's just, I'm gonna make it up for 10 seconds. If there are theoretically 150 people on the island, and that's an estimate, who are at an affordable, attainable level, and we've got 28 responses, can we extrapolate that up, or how do we do that? Because at the end of the day, the real goal of the study is to figure out, okay, do we need 60 units? Do we need 50, 30? And then, okay, we're between, like you said, Thomas and the others, we're pulling units up. Well, then how do we close that gap? And I'd love, you don't have to do it now, but I'd love to hear how we're gonna take this survey. You already talked about getting more responses, but then really be able to extrapolate it to have a number that everybody is quasi comfortable with, or at least ballpark comfortable with. As you know, the affordable group, they came up with some estimates of people and the estimated back, number of units. My hope would be we can come up with just a check on that number and just figure out how we get there. So that to me is probably the most important next step on the survey. What's the number? I mean, is it 28? Maybe. I think it's probably a lot higher than that. So if you could help us with that now or later, that would be good. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll think about that some more, but maybe consulting with the Bottom Housing Board was these similar, maybe surveys in the past on, but yeah, I would assume that that's a minimum, like what we collected so far would be the minimum need, right? I mean,
Right, an academic question, and it is, maybe there are some statisticians in the room, but I think this has to be more about statistics and how we actually do the math. So, maybe it goes out of the box. It's about surveys.
yeah, right.
The only thing I'll say about the survey is that it's really changed in 5 to 10 years. Back then, the need was home ownership, or appeared to be home ownership. And you can see the change now to rental, as far as the surveys I have seen. Not discounting the need for home ownership still, but the trend has that the two advocacy groups for housing on the island have done a good job of providing home ownership. Now have to, without discounting that, turn our attention more to rental.
Thank you, Mark.
Chris Long. Historical, walking in with people, rural housing. Just to reiterate quickly, we did a survey, Sam has referenced that. I want to know if Lanny has looked at that survey that we posted.
Yes.
Okay, so we had over 100 respondents, and as then we extrapolate backwards to about 60 units. If we're able to get more of an outreach than your survey, would it be helpful if we went back out as we had offered previously to do a more accurate, precise estimate of what is needed? We felt pretty confident in what we've done. She doesn't feel exactly the same number independently. And I just also want to bring up a point. I don't think it was posted to the Buckingham Bulletin Board. People in the audience haven't seen it, so I don't think it was posted. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Just on the survey part, Chris, I appreciate it. I think if there's a way to help get this survey to more people, get more responses back, we gotta make sure that there's not a lot of duplicates and sort of check step on that. I think then bringing your number that you calculated, bringing this number, I think they're both gonna come up about 50, 60. I mean, if you think about 28 respondents, that sort of tells me that a number of people did respond, and it's gonna get up there. It's gonna be much higher than where it is.
So Alice has already said that you still take. You can
Yeah,
still take
it's
the
still
survey.
open, anyone can go, it's on town website, but we can repost the bulletin board if that's helpful, because, some people said that would have been, that's a good spot for it,
So I
so.
think a lot of things going for now, it's happened to me personally on other things. Bulletin boards, you don't just allow people to spam, lately. It's been going into a lot of people's spam, I don't think they're out looking at it.
Right, I mean, you don't, it's on there, it's like.
So it's important for everybody to know that that survey is still open, and it's located on the town website if you have to go through it, if you haven't had an opportunity to do so.
I also think we know that the need is more than we have on the drawing board. You know what I mean? Like, in other words, whether it's 50 or 60 or 40 or 80, we know it's not insignificant. So I think it's important that we, while we're surveying, that's really brought me to that question about identifying lots. While we're surveying, we're identifying places where we can do that's.
More comments on the survey?
I have one, all right, Rosemary Tobin, Housing Board. I think it's important too to separate what the needs are, because there's the year-round need, there's the summer need, and then the business need. I think there are more numbers, less numbers for people that are living here, obviously. And then we can't run without the summer and businesses having housing also. So I think it's important to separate the three and then maybe get some information on those three categories, rather than just lumping it into one.
Thank you, Rosemary, and I agree, I mean, that's how I was gonna reserve for later on, I mean, now you brought it up, I mean, you know, some of the properties that you overlook in the fire line, that's gonna be employee housing. So I wouldn't consider that as family housing units, on the overlook of your fire line.
Not everyone has some single and employees completed that survey.
Right, but I think we should, as Rosemary says, separate from, do those set, you know.
Or to know the need.
Right, and I think we were focusing on your survey.
Thank you very much.
My name's Anna Malesko. I just lost my house with our 2 kids and other families and pets to employee housing by the corporation. It's really hard. And my biggest concern is that it's gonna take a long time when it's been a conversation for us for a long time. And that's my concern. I'm very worried about all this.
Very real.
Sure.
I agree with Anna. I get the concern for the multi-purpose housing reasons for the island as a tourism business. But I think you have to take into consideration the dynamic of the island as it's going now. If we're gonna lose families to housing, what's it gonna look like down the future? I mean, as somebody who works for the town, has a small business, also works for the town, has kids. I mean, we actually want to be here. So I think that's the majority of the concern. There's a lot of housing going on across the street from the police station. But that's for summer employees through the survey. So let's just consider people who actually want to sustain, live, provide for this community. I think that's at the forefront, personally.
And I think to follow up to what Kate was saying, about identifying these town boundaries.
Yeah.
And then identifying this person, identifying how many units can be put on there,
Sure.
and then moving forward, families. That would be my comment about it. We're waiting.
But I think we're gonna turn more into a Nantucket, Hampton situation if we're not making sure that local families actually can sustain and live here. And that should be a concern.
And I think that is my number one concern to identify this evening.
If I can, and Hillary and everybody, I think, I think there's huge accolades to the past that we're ahead of the 110%, with a few towns in the state. A lot of work by the housing board, really good work by the housing board.
Which I do commend,
No,
absolutely,
I-
but take into account real estate prices and things like that.
And that really fits into Mark's comment, which is truly a byproduct of housing costs, right? And suddenly everything goes up, I can't afford that, I need to rent, I mean, we all get that cycle. I think the reason, and I applaud everybody in this room, I applaud the independent groups, everybody is focused on this for exactly the point you just raised, and that's why we're all so passionate about it. Things don't happen urgently, that quickly. Well, we love to snap our fingers and say, there's the building. So how do we get urgency? And this is something that the Affordable Attainable Group has really been pushing on it about urgency. 513's private land, is that the fastest way to do it? Good route. All right, okay, how do we push on all of these? And we're I think I'll speak for everybody here. We're sensitive to your situation. We know it here, we've spoken a couple of times. Thank you. I think that's what's driving everybody. And so we hear you. We're trying not to drag, but yeah, we hear.
Hillary, can I ask you a question while you're?
Yeah, go for it.
So as we discussed, I think we're probably gonna get on the, already owned property by the town and what we can put there. Is that something I know everybody has a unique situation in this room with housing and others do not. So is your situation where you would be interested in housing somewhere else, or is it something that you're going to have problems for and you need assistance with building it?
I mean, ideally, I would like to have my own piece of something, but at this point, anything that I could rent, I mean, whatever is really optimal. I think the 513 needs to be more well regulated. There's not a lot of, you know.
Going into that.
Okay,
That's okay, you can introduce it.
I'm gonna go into that office if that's cool.
Just put
Right,
513
kids
on the
there.
door.
I mean, really, at this point, any option would be great, it just, I mean, I think that the lack of options and, I have a personal side to this, obviously, but, any option would be fine. I mean, if it's a rental, if it's a 513 option, if it's a building with zoning ordinances being lenient to it, either way.
Thank you. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I think that's something you can't get gleaned from a survey.
Yeah, right.
I wouldn't feel at all uncomfortable talking about your personal situation, because I think the situation that you and.
Do you want me to bring her in here?
She more understanding than we are.
I told her, don't say anything about mom.
I just, you know, the situation you're in is, I thought.
Well, and I don't wanna put myself out
But I mean,
there.
it's as compelling as it gets. It's important that story points out, you know, in a lot of ways, it epitomizes the fundamental tension that we have to figure out a policy solution around in a project.
But I think even beyond that, worrying about commerce and how the summer's gonna play out, let's worry about the people that are here
Yes.
first
Yes.
and building this community and making sure we sustain the community. Every year, people are like, oh, we're not gonna have a kindergarten class, but people still keep coming and they find housing somehow. I think the island's doing fine financially. Let's worry about keeping the people who are here sustained and livable here. That's my concern.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. 2A, brainstorm, discuss and act on affordable attainable housing options such as restructure and enforce zoning ordinance 513. Before we get into that, is this Saturday? What works on that, run that down, or where that stands now, or?
We have about 49 units and 3 of them are under review. So you passed the ordinance yesterday to change the language to allow certain enforce this section. So we'll be looking at the 3 that are under review. The 49 are.
We usually, I know we can do this. We give an explanation of what 513 is. I see the student faces in the room. I just want everybody, we talked a lot about this. I just want to make sure that everybody understands what we're talking about when we talk about 513.
So 513, that's the name of the section of the zoning ordinance, so they call it 513 for short. So it's section 513 of the zoning ordinance. It is called accessory apartments. And this allows on a property that has a principal residential dwelling for anyone to build an accessory apartment on that same lot. And it's by right. It's for year-round residents, so you're not allowed to rent it weekly to or seasonally. So there's restrictions on that it needs to be for a year-round resident. And currently it's a maximum of 2 bedrooms for that unit and a maximum size of 1,200 square feet. So it could be, so maybe you have so square feet of living space. So it could be an existing accessory dwelling and structure in a house, you could convert to a dwelling unit and rent it out. Or it could be a new construction, and the town, as I said, has been looking at potential amendments to that, so we're open to some suggestions, because it has been successful, it has, like we said, contributed to diversifying the housing stock and having 50 rental units. So, and it's privately provided, you know, so it doesn't cost the town anything, and so it's something that the town has recently been saying we need to promote more and see if there are more people interested in this and how we could help facilitate that potentially in any way. If there are any questions about it, more specifics on the ordinance, and we have the ordinance, but or anything we could talk about potential amendments that have been considered.
And that's what, on the agenda for planning board Monday?
Well, the amendment application is on the agenda for Monday and
Yeah, I have a question, I guess, about 513s, or a comment about 513s that is a potential ancillary benefit. And I see that Pierce is here, and I know there are others who are active in the seniors community, because I view them as a sort of potential one area where we could marry up a couple of policy priorities with using them for caregiver living space while also fulfilling a need for affordable units. And I would just urge you, and I'm happy to put this in a note, but it might be helpful to reach out to some of the senior advisory committee folks to see whether, for example, is capital an obstacle for people? You know, are there people who have very valuable old homes, but who don't have the cash to build an apartment for a caregiver? Because you know, it strikes me that at least some of the people who are expressing a need may well be interested in discounted rent to be a caregiver of some sort for some of our senior population. You know, making sure that the ordinance is open to those kinds of solutions, and making sure that as you know, the council, I think, is committed to working through some 513 financing type ideas. You know, whether there is, you know, for example, you could have state grants available, you know, on aging in place initiatives that could fund the development of caregivers. So I just want to make sure that we have that in our minds as we're doing 513 conversation.
Thank you, Keith. Hold on, let me give the council a chance. No, Rosemary?
There's
And then Chair
another,
Bush?
there's another area, since we're focusing on 513, that I think we might not, I don't know if anyone's mentioned, but there are apartments that are deeded for income from Block Island. So if it's a building that has 4 apartments, one of the apartments is supposed to be deed restricted for just your own income. So that might be an area to go to next, since we kind of focused on the 513s and called the people out a little bit. So maybe that's another area to maybe find 4 more apartments that are not being used as they're supposed to be. So it's another part, it came in the 80s, I think, when people were cutting houses up into 4 sections, they allowed you to do that, but one of the apartments had to be lived in with deriving income from Block Island. So it's another area to look,
Right, and I
in
think,
addition to the 513.
and I think that, because it's not just 513, but we've had issues with West Side 20 where some of those houses are empty.
Yeah, I mean,
And there's no enforcement.
the 4 apartments are being rented instead of being used as 1 apartment.
Right, and I guess what I'm saying is that it's an enforcement issue, not just an area.
Yeah.
But I mean, like I said, we do have West Side 20 issues.
Yeah.
To say the least. Thank you. Susan Bush.
Yes, well, that's my question. Can you speak to what, of the 50 units we have, how many are being used appropriately? How does the town document that they continue to be used appropriately? And what are the penalties and what's the enforcement if they are found in default?
There's a whole section in the zoning ordinance that, explains the restrictions and, they need to submit a lease, to the building department, and the building department will do an inspection. And then if they are in violation, they would receive a notice of violation. We've had a few, there is a provision to allow the combination of a 513 and convert it back to an accessory residential structure. So we've had a few property owners, use that section, depending on what the circumstance for their particular family.
Jen, is that done on an annual basis?
It's
Checks and balances?
every 3 years is what is in the ordinance.
It was done last year.
Yes.
Just
Recently.
disputed this.
So they're
Susan,
inspected, lease,
Affidavit.
affidavit,
and an abandonment of it means just removing the kitchen stove.
correct.
So,
And they can't abandon it if it's tied to a zoning decision. That would be a separate, process. But if it isn't tied to a zoning decision, and they apply, if they were allowed to have it by right, then they could.
so just to clarify Susan's question, and you said it already, but, there's 50 units, 3 are under review, is that what I heard?
That's correct.
Thank you.
One of the things that I appreciate Allison explaining what a 513 is, and many of us that have looked into this, between a 405, 404, 513, I mean, there are a number of ordinances, some are affordables. 513 is actually nothing to do with income, it's all about year round, and good, bad, or indifferent, that's just what it is. The one thing that I think we need to do is, and this does get to surveys, and I know Jen's been passionate about it, is do a lot of the new homeowners know what a 513 is? Do people who've owned homes even know what a 513 is? And I think the answer is probably shockingly no. And that there's a huge void of awareness. And they hear this discussion about housing and they're all like, oh, yeah. And they walk by their open garage or they walk by that barn that used to have folks. And I'm just thinking that an event or ability to get out to new homeowners, explain what it is, the urgency of it. A little bit to the discussion we had about timing. In my personal opinion, and some of you have heard this, having a private landowner agree to building something, doing it, that will be so much faster than any large public project. I don't think by public, I mean all of right, but I mean, they're just processes, right? Whereas a homeowner would say, I'll do it, sure, let's go, let's get it through zoning and let's do it. So the more we can get awareness up about 513, the more we can build up an understanding of the issues and for planning to figure out how do we make this as flexible or what you guys need. I think that's critical, but I do think awareness is a big issue.
I think you could make some minor changes that would create more units. I mean, you could allow 2 per lot in specific zones. You could allow 513s in all of the affordable houses. They're socio. How many apartments kind of exist now in them? And then you're allowed to have a 513 by right. So you don't have to go to the zoning board as long as you comply your building lot coverage and your setbacks. So do you allow additional coverage? If it's
And these are
40%,
planning board discussions, we're gonna have.
maybe you
20
allow 5 or 6.
I think the focus on the 513 or the 405 is to me really important because that's the fastest way to get something done. At least in my opinion.
Right, well, 405 is something that the housing board would use, because that's the income restricted. So 513 and everyone.
Then you bring up a great point, allowing them in existing affordable units is a win-win because it supplements the income of the owners in providing dwelling on a year-round basis for somebody else. I remember 30 years ago when Beacon Hill was proposed, the zoning board outlawed accessory apartments in there because at that time they were being so abused. But that was 30 years ago, times have changed. My one question on 513 before we leave it is, it now allows for 2 bedrooms. Could it be for 3 bedrooms? Let's say a young family has a
Absolutely.
boy and a girl.
Could increase the living square footage.
But it
by
says-
more bedrooms.
One of the restrictions is 2 bedrooms.
Right, that's something we could, that like the planning board would.
Don't you guys have anything?
And it is on the, so that is one of the things that has been discussed. Potentially, do we add their bedroom, increase the square footage, do you say, by special use permit, have it larger, do you set that maximum? So these are things the planning board has been, discussing.
I should have mentioned, there's another section of 513 that talks about commercial properties and service commercial, old harbor commercial, new harbor commercial. And it does refer to seasonal employment. So you also look at expanding that to some of the other zones to allow the creation of more 513s. You would have to decide if you want it to be for seasonal or and because they're allowed to have
Right.
a larger
That's all on the table.
One of the things that I would love to see on the table, and I will contribute this to a conversation, town manager. When a business, in any business, whether it's Dead Eyes filling employee housing or whatever, should we require as part of that agreement to have 1 or 2 513s around employees?
They would love to.
So I don't mean year-round employees, I mean year-round residents. So if they're building to somebody's house, right? If they're gonna take that, make 7, 8 employee housing, which is only gonna be for the summer, do we require in that deal 1 year-round?
I don't think you would want to restrict it to. They would need to be able to fill that year round with one of their employees.
Maybe or maybe not, I'm not.
What I'm hearing from the property owners, that's what they would like to do. But if they're limited, so square footage or, number of units that they're allowed on the property, maybe they have employees that are around.
I'd make it a consideration as the planning board looks at this, and we think about it as, back to the discussion earlier, as businesses are buying houses, making them their summer housing, do we make a requirement for year-round in that year? And I'm not debating here, I think it's a discussion for the planning board, because I think that's a way to sort of push a little bit of year-round while they're getting their summer.
Right, and the feedback I've received is that some businesses would like to be able to do that because they do have their own employees. But then there's, to create the employee housing, it's like a seasonal employee housing.
Right, doesn't that require a change right now? I mean, employee housing test, but it has to be in right now.
Technically, yes,
So we need to work on that also.
well, yes and no, part of it, yes.
Right.
Chris, wanted to comment on a couple of things about 513s, and I would think that people who are buying houses now probably, in my opinion, aren't too concerned about 513s. It's the existing property owners from, let's say, historically island families or people who have been here for quite a long time. With that, we have 403 and 405, detached multifamily and attached multifamily. And what I'm struggling with is how to incorporate 513s into those. I think you could have a much greater impact in getting affordable, attainable structures or residences by going through those and incorporating 513s into those. Is my right? That's very confusing. And how this all weaves together, and I really haven't quite figured it out. Hoping through the discussion on Monday, Wednesday, there'll be some progress on that. So, yeah, just reiterate, I think new homeowners are not going to be a highly productive day to do apartments, but I think historic island families and people that have been there for 10 years, much better targets.
Do you want me to explain part of that? Because the attached multifamily development and, secondary dwelling development are not allowed by right, they're allowed by special permit with pretty high density requirements and standards and rent them seasonally, potentially, depending on, which one you're applying.
The other thing is, and I hear you, Chris, on new owners, existing folks. I don't want to discount anybody buying a house, so I think awareness is the important thing, and you never know, right? It doesn't hurt, and whether it may be for a caretaker or it may be for senior assistant, assistant, whatever it may be, I don't want to discount anybody who's buying a Block Island. I think it would be a mistake.
Josh?
Maldonado, yeah. So what you're saying mostly is that we need to incentivize people to get more involved in doing 513s, new homeowners, right? Do we really believe someone who's buying a $4 million home is going to do a 513 just out of, just to be nice? I don't think it's really gonna happen. I kind of feel like it's an either or situation where either we incentivize people to build 513s on their properties, new homeowners, builds. And if they don't, maybe it should be a tax on towards these public works or anything. Yeah, I just feel like they should, be a part of it in either way. Either they're having a 513 or they're helping supply affordable housing. Because we have to figure out who we're holding water for. Are we holding water to make sure that freedom of people that decide to buy their third home? Hey, they can do that, of course, but should probably pay the piper a little bit considering other people have to leave now. So. Just wanted to say that.
Thank you, Josh.
One of the things that your most recent conversation points out to me, Jim, is it would be really hard to do. See, clearly you're hearing from us, there's a desire to maximize affordable housing. What are the things you would do to accomplish that? You know, I mean, and I'm not putting you on the spot now. But given that this is a brainstorming session about how to maximize access to affordable housing, I'd like to hear from people who deal with it every day. At some point, sort of, these are the three things we would suggest. If you want to maximize affordable housing, here are the three things. That'd be helpful to know.
I would separate it into attainable and affordable.
Right. Mm-hmm. Great, then whatever, the top 2 or 3 things for each of those categories, and we'd all love to hear what you think those are.
I just have a question for Josh's comment. If a property is purchased with a qualified 513, what are the obligations of that homeowner to maintain that? Do they even know?
Depends on if it's allowed by a zoning decision or if it's allowed by right. According to 513, then they could abandon that.
So they can not use it.
Yes,
Okay.
because I think homeowners were willing to take part in this section because they had an option to take the account, use it as an accessory residential structure if it didn't, the rental didn't work out for them, or for whatever reason, they sell the property, it isn't a deep restricted, 99-year ordinance.
So that's to me part of the reason that there's value in talking about a subsidy program for 513, because via the subsidy, I think we can have all the provisions that you. So I actually think that's pretty Machiavellian, but I do think there's some value to, in exchange for a subsidy, having requiring a deed restriction, for example.
It would be similar to the section 405, which is the affordable housing section. It is 90 or it's perpetuity,
Josh, just to your comment on incentives, many of you may not know this, but the town has been working hard on looking at taxes and land tax. Something we can control, and there's been a discussion, and it's actually, hopefully, we will have enabling legislation to allow us to have a discussion about this. Right now, we really can't. But one of the ideas, and it will go through many public hearings, many public discussions, would be, boy, if you've got a year-round rental, maybe your tax should be lower, or you have an apartment or 513 apartment that you rent year-round, maybe your taxes should be lower. So how do we sort of, well, it's not going to be a lot, it's a signal of incentive. And how do we run all of our tools to try and drive that kind of housing? So that's been a big effort for some of us over the last few months. And it could be a big discussion this summer and this fall. That would take effect next fiscal year, in theory.
Can I say one? Just one quick piece of that. I think that's wonderful, and so it would be a lower tax rate for people that supply year-round housing.
Year-round, yes, that's the thought. That would be the thought. Obviously, it has to go through the community. Obviously, it's a big discussion.
I think that's fantastic, and I always feel like that kind of incentive works for people who already want to do this exact thing, supply year-round housing. There's a lot of people who just don't want it, who just don't want people living on their property, and that's what they want to do. But then they shouldn't have to pay in their own way. You know, I think like either way, either decision, we should have to help this. It's a big time need, we know it. So, you know, it's either you supply by loan rate, or if you don't, your tax goes directly towards affordable housing. You know, so you're supplying either way. It's kind of the way to wiggle out of it. There's plenty of people who are buying large properties for a lot of money. That's fine. They're not going to want people on their property. They're like, no, I bought this to have my private place. Okay, well, you got a little tax. So, I don't know, just one small idea. I think it should be either or effective. I totally agree.
Let me just say one thing too, is as we discuss and brainstorm, this is wonderful. But keep in mind too, it has to have an enforceable component in it, whether it's on an annual basis, whatever. We've seen the negative byproducts of not carrying through on enforcement. We should have something in place when we consider all these options. And it's enforceable.
Anybody else have any comments on the final? I really want to move on the agenda just really quick. We're only on item 2. That's no shit.
This is a question for, can you hear me?
Yeah.
This question for Chris. Chris, in the recommendation, it sounds like we're saying that all 513 created would be deed restricted for eligible residents. Would you explain to the public where the motivation was behind the deed restriction?
My question.
Should wait.
Is that a planning board discussion? I would think that is.
It's a-
The first planning board discussion made Monday and Wednesday,
And everybody should go.
and because that was pre-existing. Some of it.
Any more comments on that, please? Go ahead. Go ahead.
Stacey Mishra, I just have a question, and I apologize if it's a silly question, but along the tax lines, is it a possibility to tax those with a second home or people that use residents on Block Island, not as their primary residence? Is it an option to tax them in a larger tax bracket than what the rest of us are paying?
Well, that's with the enabling legislation, I think that we're looking for right now, just to be, we're looking for enabling legislation for us to even
Have that discussion.
have that discussion.
So the answer is, we'll see.
Okay.
And what the community wants.
The question you're asking, the question Josh is asking, is sort of, occurs to me is worth mentioning that one of the great frustrations of sitting up here is that we have no flexibility to taxation without getting permission from the legislature. In our ability, the thing that Sven and Mary Ann have been working on, is asking permission from the state to basically have a conversation about implementing a more flexible property tax structure. But absent that legislation, we couldn't even, we could have the conversation, but it wouldn't matter. So things like whatever, tax on second homes, tax on third homes, conveyance tax on, properties in excess of a certain amount, or, whatever your mind could come up with, all basically require us to go to Providence and ask for it. And that's part of the rationale for what we're doing with the lobbyists, where we're sort of building bridges that we need.
Thank you, City Matters.
Apropos to what Josh was alluding to,
Cindy, could you come up and just sort of talk here?
The concept of an impact fee, perhaps through the zoning process, where people are coming before the town, looking to build large houses, may not want to have a 513. The idea of an impact fee could offset those concerns and it might not fall into the taxation issues, if you tie it into the building process and zoning.
Sure, appreciate that.
Lots of communities have them,
Yes.
along this line.
Sorry, Millie, get on this.
That's my job.
I know, but as things are flying, I just want to make sure that we have a.
I'm sorry, snarky after like three.
I think we're-
Top 30.
I just want to make sure that we have.
Yeah, no, I'm,
So when we're done, we'll have that actual plan of things I've discussed.
okay.
I wanted to mention that earlier. but Thank you.
Don't ask again.
Any more questions on 513? Question on 513, Doug Michelle?
I'll just be very quick. I just read online the other day, Nantucket is considering exactly what cities talk about. They had 800 people are being voting on the proposal. Otherwise, size is not a detriment. I got a 513. It's under 700 feet. It's 2 bedrooms, bathroom, kitchen, living area, dining area. So you don't need a huge space to build. If I want to add 200 square feet, I can have 4 bedrooms. But, so that you don't need a large building. Secondly, is your current tax structure now taxes 513s as if they're a single family home, separately divisible, it is fully taxed. And I argued with the tax board, it says, it's undivisible, I can't break this off and sell it, but it's taxed as if I could. And that, I don't think you have to go to legislature, that is a local issue.
Thank you.
And just so everybody knows that I give the impact tax, if he's coming, we have to go to the state to enable us, again, enabling legislation to be able to do that. But it's something that we're definitely talking about. I mean, again, that will be a little further out, but let's get it down to the folks.
More 513 out there? I think we're going. Acquire property for affordable housing. They kicked around. Obviously, we would love to do that. Is there any comments from staff on that topic? This is the last time we've discussed it. I mean, I know that we would like to identify funds or maybe get large donations from people. Where are we with that? I know that Rowan's on this agenda.
Yeah.
Nobody's donated us anything. The update?
I'll say something on that because our wonderful conservation groups, when they go out and inquire all this, whatever process they use, whether it's easements, selling of non-developmental rights, whatever, I would like to see them more so put on that menu of possible uses, affordable housing. You never know until you ask. And I don't think if they pursue that, I think they give that generic aquifer protection, all the sexy words you have to say for conservation land. But if they could include or let that person know who's at the other side of the table, let them know the need for affordable housing and would they be interested in it. You never know until you ask. And then you keep crossing fingers for generous people like Ellen Jackie and the such who come forward when that project happened, we hoped that would snowball when someone heard about it. Sadly, it hasn't. So if you're considering a land donation of any kind, consider affordable housing.
Thank you, Mark.
One just quick thing, on this, I think we should pursue within zoning, and I guess it would be planning board. At first would be about developmental rights, and how do we look at, as land is acquired or has been acquired, how do we shift those development rights to other properties? And right now,
Can you repeat that? Because that's the first time I've heard that come out of your mouth.
development rights.
It's transferring development rights.
So that, yeah, right. No,
It's a shift. I'm glad to hear it.
no, because I think we should do that and really explore that where, and we've talked about it in a number of projects, but if there is land acquired, that has development rights, and there's gotta be, there is not, the other communities to it, be able to take those rights, transfer them to other properties so that you can increase density. And I see Barbara and Dory, and I think that should be something the planning board should really look at, so that we can move to higher density in some of these lands.
Thank you, sir, very much. Does anybody have any comments on acquiring property for affordable housing?
Yes. We should.
Existing structures for affordable housing will have projects in the works we're talking about, or we have ideas on paper, not in the works, You didn't find any more since we've been having this discussion?
Not that I know.
Well,
We submitted some, suggestions for relay by 13, which is before planning now. I'm wondering if it's time to also try to have changes for 4, 3, and 4, 5. We need to have it right here. And if we do so, is that going to be overwhelming planning to try and work on something parallel paths? Should we let them get through 513? Because that's a 45-day period, which is reasonable. Or what's the council's sense on working parallel paths and also trying to modify 4, 3, 4, 5 at the same time?
thank you.
I guess one follow-up question would be, what are the thoughts on 405, the need? I haven't heard, what, okay, yes, I did earlier, so the 405 is that principal, affordable housing section of the zoning ordinance that allows, it basically is the density bonus for affordable housing, so at least double the density and for nonprofit developers such as Black Island Housing Board, 4 times as many units on the same set of property as would have been if they were not affordable. So obviously that's the key part of developing affordable housing is density makes things more affordable because of the cost of land. So I guess just want to follow up Chris's comment about what's the extent of the proposed revisions are. Is there a need to amend that section? What's not working, I guess.
So I could actually just introduce yourself. I'm Mike Schuster, by the way. I actually moved here 2 years ago, and Chris and I are good friends. And Chris, I actually am going to build my boat in my house. I'm just waiting for the cost of wood to go down. But the aside is for the 405 conversation, I think the direct problem in how that's written out is that by giving the advantage to a nonprofit developer over a private developer, what you're not incentivizing these to build as a private developer, like you've already said on the town house, instead of record, they can build themselves 3 or 4 times as fast as the town at a much cheaper cost, so they don't have to pay for that wage. And like Prakash is coming up here and buying up a lot of the island right now. He can build a lot cheaper than you guys can. I'm not saying we want Prakash to do this by any means, don't do that at all. But what I'm saying is that if you give the private developer the right to 4 units on a space that's zoned correctly for it, and it makes sense for the town, it's the comprehensive plan. It's a win-win all around. I think that's the direct problem in that piece of how that's working, because you're never gonna get private people to develop it even at 2 times. Because the rate of return goes from like 2% to 4%, And that's not worth anybody's time to do it. If somebody can make 8%, people will develop on 8%, right? They won't do it on 4% cap rate, and that's really what we're talking about.
Allison, would Pilot Hill be an example of what you just explained?
Yeah, I mean, I want to defer to the Block Island Housing Board on some of these questions. I'm not an expert in financing units and they certainly have more experience. But as to like when you're getting into specifics like that, I mean, are private developers motivated or incentivized to develop affordable housing, even if it's 4 units versus 2? I mean, can you sell 2 at market rate more than you could sell 4 at that?
So the truth is so you'd have to sit down, right? And a group of people would have to sit down and run the numbers on what land cost is, if you're selling it for the attainable housing versus if you're renting it for true affordable housing. And you just, it's a formula, it's math from it, and you just make the numbers work. And it's a zone, and zoning is totally a part of it too, because you can only do it in certain zones. We don't want to put this out in, I don't know, on Andy's Way, that doesn't necessarily make sense, but somewhere around town hall, it's a real idea. You know what I'm saying?
I was appointed by the board to talk to a consultant, off island, to kind of give us, help with this whole thing. And he talked a lot about this sort of situation. The companies that he usually deals with do larger scale things, like, 100 units. And I did ask him, would they consider smaller ones? And it was a lot of tax advantage, private versus nonprofit conversation. So I do think he's probably someone we could go to again to talk about that, because I think it might be something for a pilot project with that, maybe allowing it to see if it works, and if it's successful, it works. But there are people that do that out there, and not just for, profit so much. They do it, because eventually they do, end up, like we were talking about the rentals, how to handle the rentals, and that's what they do. They make their money by handling the rentals. So it's something that does exist. And when I talked to him, there was a lot of language and a lot of information, so I think it would be helpful to talk to him again and maybe.
He's making his money on 10%, he's making money on the 10% management.
Yeah, so it's like I said, they normally make more money because bigger units, like more units, 100 units or so, and I said, well, we would only have 20. Would they be interested in that? And that's when he said that would be my job to go and pitch it. So it is something that does exist.
Thank you, Rosemary.
I'll just say one strategy that a lot of communities use is the inclusionary zoning. So that's where the private developer would be including, like 25% of units have to be affordable in a, in a development. So that's something that's it's within our comp plan, but it's not something that the town has implemented, mostly because we don't have many large, we don't have any major subdivisions where it would produce a significant, if any, number of units. But maybe it could be structured a little bit more uniquely and collecting some funding that could go to affordable housing fund and construct the units off-site.
Right, and by the way, I think constructively what you're saying now too, I think that the 25% number you mentioned, here it should only be 100%. If you're going to get that advantage of doing something like that, you only get that if you're providing 100% affordable housing. That's it, because there's also compromising Block Island and the aesthetic of it too, in which, I don't think anybody wants to do the same time.
I think the town tried with the year-round income apartments, like when they did with them before, I think that was how they were trying. You can have 4 units, but one of them has to be derived income from year-round. So that language is older, but it's in there. I just don't know, if that's something you can build on, or again, try going forward, like we did in 513.
Thank you very much. Existing structures? How do you discuss on them? We don't want to do it. Obviously, we've identified those. I think we are using those. I mean, if we're doing it again with existing structures. Any discussion on that? Yes. these restrictive zoning ordinances to allow for easier building and development of affordable housing. I think we've heard a lot of that here already, if you want us to be specific on it. Council? You know, on that?
The only thing I'll say again is I'm all for it, but there has to be that enforcement component.
And I think a lot of these things on the agenda are rolled into the.
Yeah, the discussion.
Planning conversations. I thought we were in a different spot on use of the existing structures, but that, for example, is what I have in mind, you know, as part of the 513 conversation, you know?
Restrictive zones, obviously, you know, we have a good basis of moving forward on that. Comment on that, Chris?
Well, Chris, while you're getting up, my opinion would be, let's do 513, get that done, and then do 405 and the others. I just think right now, that may answer a whole lot of dialogue about 405 and others. So while I'd like to do everything at once, I think let's do one thing at a time, do it right. Chris, to answer your question.
I was gonna talk about 403 and 405.
And to your point of what we're considering, and what we'd like to do is put, straw poll to planning for their review, like just did with 513 that we submitted, we're overview of what we submitted, that inform being submitted to planning for consideration. So once we get your feedback, then we can rewrite it and present it. So we're not doing it at the same time, you know, I'm just trying to say, if we are allowed to go to planning with our ideas, get some feedback from the town planner, with office, take that into consideration, then after 513 gets settled, submit our recommendations to the see. I think that would save a lot of time. That works for the town.
I can certainly appreciate it once we get there.
I would just say, having said that, if when you're going through the process of identifying properties, as we discussed earlier, if there are a couple of properties where you're sort of like, you know, you could fit 4 nice units on here, and that might be a candidate for, you know, using these 4 whatevers, let's hear that. You know, I mean, yeah. Seems to me.
And I can, housing board has amended 405 a few times
Yeah.
because of like a specific part of
Right,
the workshop.
exactly.
Good. Private public partnerships. That's still in the hopper. Possibly questions or comments on that?
Other than we have that already in place, we want to start using it. We have BED as the private and we have the housing board as the public. So they could work in concert. I believe strongly that BED is out of bricks and mortars and housing is more so bricks and mortars. There's no reason why they can still be allies on other aspects of good affordable housing.
You know, anybody else have any comments on private public partnership product? The other person.
I feel something. Has the town or anybody on the board that ever put out a request for ideas or proposals to from public-private partnership? Actually put it out there saying, this is a piece of land that we have, this is what we need. To the, as a RFP, or is it called RFI?
The only time I know that the town's done it was about Coast Guard Station, looking for, you know, people to come in.
That was a university,
But it wasn't about housing, so I don't think anybody's done it.
which should be done, that's something that can be done. Re-expedite fashion.
I think that's a valuable potential when we identify these pieces of property.
And you can use the Coast Guard station for
Yeah.
that. Take your question.
Mike Schuster, again, following up on what Chris said right there. I actually had under agreement, $350,000 lot in the town. That I was hoping that President could back it up, but I was hoping I was gonna be able to bring here today or one of these meetings. But I exactly wanted to do what we were just talking about, which was put 3-4 units on it that's rentable. And develop that, so I think that I'm one person who lives in town who's totally willing to look at that, and I don't think I'm the only one either. I think there'd be a lot of people who would be interested in doing something like that, so I think it should be started.
Thank you very much.
Mike, you bring up a good point, and I've said it before, 100 pennies still makes $1, so if we whittle away at it even one at a time.
I just, remind everybody that a couple months ago, we asked the town council to go out for our public-private partnerships. During this meeting, so I really do support what Chris just said. It's a lot easier for these entities to find you than you to find them. So if you would probably know that you're interested, I think it would help.
Thank you, Chris. Yes. Ground leasing, we discussed, for those who have afford to build, we can't afford to purchase land. Again, I guess it's all part of that. For that.
I sort of think it's worth continuing to explore. Because I think and you know, to Jen's earlier point about perhaps drawing some lines around attainable versus affordable. You know, I think there are people who are families who under sort of mainland circumstance would be able to buy a wonderful house on the mainland, given their income. But the land cost here is a barrier to that. So if we can figure out a way to, you know, buy ground lease of town lots or something like that, enable someone to build a house. Again, that may be in the category of attainable, but it also potentially gives you the opportunity, as I was saying earlier, to locate a house in the budget.
I think Carpenter Beach on the other side is an example of that, where they don't own the land, but they own the dwellings. And right along Rocky Point is another example too.
You know, it enables us to have deed restrictions.
Those deed restrictions didn't work out too well for Rocky Point because they knocked them all down, but I understand what you're saying.
And, Newport County is an active organization called Church Community Housing that follows that model. And they've worked in places like Jamestown, Middletown, Newport, located in Newport. So we can certainly reach out to them, and since it's the Rhode Island, but there's lots of other examples of that. And I think that's where there's a good opportunity to partner with the land trust in future projects. That's with that type of a model.
So my statement isn't to discount the affordable need, because there is that need, but there's also a second group of people that don't fit into the category of affordable, but they also can't purchase a $750 to $1 million house. And there are a group of people, I was in that category long ago, and this sort of thing with the land could maybe help that. You know, maybe they purchase the land at a low price, and they can build the house with some assistance and you know, all that kind of stuff. So we don't want to, you know, discount any affordable part of it, but there is another section that sort of gets lost in the focus on affordable when they are business owners here and people wanting to be here and live here, have their lives here, but they just don't fit into that category.
Rosemary, are you saying for home ownership?
Well,
Yeah,
you
but
would,
then rental.
yeah, I mean, some people are in that middle area and they can maybe afford to do a prefab house or in 3 years build a house, but they can't afford to buy the land for 600 or 700,000 and then build a house. And construction loans are tough to get as a mortgage, it's much easier to get a mortgage than it is construction loans, so. And it's not discounting the need for affordable or rental, it's just another category.
Right.
And are here.
Thank you, Rosemary. moving houses slated for demolition, that's an ongoing program. You know, so I don't think we need to delve too much into that.
Other than it works in other places, could it work here? Possible. Went over this with Catherine, they have to be, well, it has to be financially feasible, it's just cheaper to build a house instead of moving one. They have to be geographically feasible, you can't move all the way from the neck and maybe down to Southwest Point. And this is spatially feasible, so there's a lot of components to it. But when it does present itself, it's yet another tool that we could use.
Informational sessions for property owners for encourage development, housing, that's come up, report on that. Expedited board process, review for affordable housing applications. Any comment on that? Anything that's popped up, that's ongoing. Ongoing discussion on that, or? Have there is. Like, that's kind of the list.
Yeah, I mean, we had discussions on ways to expedite the process for affordable housing board or Baptist church, even for various, follow the process.
Comments on that? Questions, concerns?
I would say some of the timetables are set by the state when we're talking about, depends on the type of project, we're talking about a major subdivision, you know, there's processes and it's also helpful to make sure that you get time to thoroughly review it and make comments and changes to the plan so that the final product is something that's successful and that the abutters have the opportunity to weigh in and but I think maybe the housing board or others that have developed that on that side of the application process, that they may have recommendations or on the need for, if there is a need to expedite it, if that's something that's been a concern in the past, or if sometimes that time is needed to develop the next set of application materials, so.
While we've been working on this for the last 6 months and reviewing the ordinances, we read that it was possible for zoning and for planning, both which are special requirements. Development of a project and not necessarily coordinate those requirements. And so I can see this being a ping pong match going back and forth into planning. Is that
No, it depends on the review process that's required. If it's a subdivision and the planning board approves a subdivision, zoning board may have to approve a portion of the project. But then if it's a 405 project without the subdivision, the zoning board, and the planning board gives recommendations.
One of the interesting things having served on zoning relatively recently that's important to keep in mind is that I believe in my experience, the reason for delays tends to be the applicant, not the process. So they don't have their packet together, or they haven't followed the checklist, or it's actually kind of interesting. You think it's one of those things where we need to cut out our well, actually, we need people to sort of read the rules and file in accordance with the rules. But I do, when I think about these, whatever, multiple 513s or ground leases for housing, where you're talking about building particular units, I do think that at some point there's some value in coming up with a few kind of designs that we know work for these types of uses. So that's because having built a house, not in Rhode Island, but having built a house, I remember that part of the most intimidating thing was like getting the whole plan together, and knowing kind of what kind of septic you were supposed to put in. And there's a lot of stuff you have to do before you're actually ordering a framing package. you know, and it seems to me that having some things that are off the shelf, you know, that are kind of pro bono, or the town pays for, or that people volunteer to do, that are, you know, 4 nice Cape Cod designs that are 1,200 square feet and 2 bedroom, whatever, and here's the septic system, et cetera, would be a very helpful thing to sort of, and that meets the checklist, you know, it's the kind of thing where we can provide some assistance to people who need to go through the process.
All the time, because people will ask, in homeowners will ask, what's an example of.
Right.
Land out.
Tim?
The housing board has Cherry Hill subdivision in the rearview mirror. So having recently gone through a 5-lot subdivision, we dealt with planning, we dealt with zoning. And I want to say that the rules and regs that are in place, the process that we went through with planning and zoning was very supportive, very cooperative, and they tried to help facilitate things as expeditiously as they could. I think looking back, our major problem was the engineers. Just as it, you know,
Interesting.
it just took forever to get the engineering work done. So I do give kudos to planning and zoning, they were very helpful, and engineers were tough.
Consider a building subsidy on rolling fund for 513. And threw that out there, we can leave that on the list. Funding sources, update on the meeting with the Deputy Commerce Secretary of Housing, I had this the other night. A lot of council met with the Deputy Commerce Secretary of Housing. I don't know, Mary, understand, you want to give that discussion to this group? I know we had it the other night, but.
So a number of us, Cindy and a number of us met with a gentleman named Josh Saul, really nice guy from New York. I will preface this with saying that it is very clear that he's waiting for a lot of funding to come. And he's got some good ideas. He is very energized about looking at pilot projects here. They've been sort of discussed as to how do we work together, what are some of our issues. I think we just need to keep meeting with them, keep that dialogue going, figure out who's very important on it. But that's another activity our lobbyists work hard on. And I think it's a communication that's going to be critical going forward. And right now they have very little funding until all of the legislature sort of comes through.
Yeah, that'll be different in 3 weeks.
I was gonna say about a month
In a month.
and hopefully you guys met with him by Zoom, we met with him in person. Hopefully we'll be meeting with him in about a month and can really start to solidify what we're asking for. Just so you know, we asked for a little bit of a pilot project to really help us figure out rental housing. And really sort of come to where I'm gonna use the term project manager, or project lead. How do we start to look at rental housing models? How does this work? If we are going to do something on Wall O'Brien with rental housing and ownership housing, help us get jump started. Bring that expertise to us. Help us look at whether it's infrastructure bank or different funding sources. And that person, he actually going to go identify potentially somebody's not meeting. That person would really help us get the game up quickly, and would be a good pilot project that they could then work with other towns to get them moving faster.
Another big thing was, he's waiting for his budget.
It's great, okay,
Basically,
absolutely.
every other sentence was, when I get my budget, when I get my budget, so, you're right, in another month, we should probably, the state budget should be passed, and hopefully we'll be able to get some opportunities. Follow up with them.
Thank you, Mary. I just think it's important to note that the leadership here has reached out to him and we're on his radar. We're not gonna be, I think we're probably one of the first in the door when he got hired. So
think Stack was the other issue. I think Stack was another issue. And I think it maybe ties to the budget.
So, again, on Adams, I had 2 discussions with him. I think that's where we need to be right now. And moving forward, still engaging, so that's an ongoing engagement there. Other possible funding sources, we've looked at these, I think we could probably wrap that up with number 3, too, legislation for tax on affordable housing. These are just items that have come up, we have brought up other funding sources as trying to, where they are, so we just leave this on here. Legislation, that has come up. I don't know, if any movement on that, council, staff?
I think especially the third one, I think we need to agree on as a council, as a town, get our lobbyists working on for next year. Because that is, in essence, we have to go to the state to get them to allow us to, it's 2% of a purchase towards housing. And that is a state legislated tax. So while we may want to do it tomorrow, that will happen. So I think that is a priority. Number 3, I think is a really good priority for the lobbyists, and that we'll start working on in about 6 weeks, once this legislation is done. We cannot, Andre's mentioned this a couple of times here for me, we can't bring in anything more to the legislature right now. They sort of closed the door, closed the window, trying to actually do the things they're trying to tackle. So this would be a little bit further out, but a critical, we all know 2% of a lot of big land sales can add up.
I think we have to figure out if we actually want to do that.
Yeah, I mean, we should discuss it.
Right, my personal opinion on adding another transfer is driving up the price of, making it more expensive, to buy a house on Rock Island. I would think we would have a lot of, opposition to that from many different groups, but, that's next to legislative agenda. Keep it on the docket. So those are my initial thoughts on it. Chris? Chris? Really first.
As far as you're talking about 2%, you mean, is that in reference to maximizing the like, are you specific to land trust aid for charge?
No, the idea has come up about adding another 2% house. Another 2%, not land trust.
So here, this is kind of, I think everybody recognizes, this is kind of the mark you alluded to earlier. This is the position that we're in, created it ourselves, in a sense. Maybe not, clearly not on purpose, but half our island is undeveloped. Which is good, okay? And we have fees that are assessed for property purchases that go directly to setting aside more land for uses, none of which is developing housing. I have a problem. I think the conservation organizations, land trust, Island Conservancy, Nature Conservancy, all done like stellar job to where like we are better than pretty much everybody at it. But it's hurting the very people that keep this island operating, essentially. And when I see kids, I'm gonna no disrespect to Hillary or Alicia, but they were kids when I first got my house through affordable housing. When I see that, they have to look at leaving. You know, it's kind of a black eye for the community. And I think particularly when we start talking about fees or land trust or extra taxes, remember we built a lot of the infrastructure that this island has on the backs of people that don't live here year round. And not that I've heard any of this, people complaining about it. You want broadband? Do it with my tax dollars. I need it. I need it all summer. But I think we need a shift in focus priority you know, away from finding another path, or another cartway, or another front yard, or, you know, like, we need a shift in philosophy, at least temporarily. And I think that could happen legislatively, but it also has to happen. I don't discount any of the past work at all, but we're at a point now where, you know, it's coming to an apex of, I don't want to use the word gentrification, but when you see corporations, like, we don't allow McDonald's. Well, I don't let, no offense, but our hotels, easy. We've allowed that, and it's creeping up on us. And I think we can learn from other communities that have successfully curtailed it or addressed it and do it expeditiously. When I was on the council, we approved funds for the development of the Thomas property. We got the town manager's house. Where's the rest of that project? That should have been done. Should have been done. Why isn't it done? The third phase of that was, I think, town houses on the farm. Why is that not even developed? I mean, we need to move quicker. If I remember right, the house that I was able to buy and live in was the town manager and the town council led by Ed McGovern basically told Mary Jane to get it done. Directed her to get it done. I don't remember the funding sources. Who?
I do,
Okay.
yeah.
I know the land was purchased inexpensively. And Mark, I think you suggested when conservancy groups start acquiring properties, put affordable housing at the forefront. I think that's a great idea. But we're getting to we're getting to a point of no return. It's gonna be tough. We don't have a fundamental shift in philosophy, and particularly when it comes to funding sources. And you can get it done, you just have to want to get it done and push it. You know, I'm gonna bring up the Tom's property. I want to see something next month, like you're moving forward, because I voted for it. And the money was sitting there. Why is it just sitting there? Like, get it done. You know, because you have, there's a dozen retirees at the school. Where are we gonna find those people? Executive positions, can't always find on island. Never mind everybody that's here that's talking about not being able to stay here year round and work, the people that make your food, mow your lawn, stock grocery shelves, that keep dialing moving, collaborate. So yeah, it's an urgent need. Like, we can't keep, I can't wait for I'm on the planning board, can't wait for Monday and Wednesday to be fun. And I know where I sit, I'm all for increasing density, I'm all for relaxing certain rules and regulations too. I'm all for incentives. So this town council, I think, should take that role, that leadership role, in trying to, kind of shift the focus on trying to keep the attainable, the affordable and attainable kids, for lack of a better word, sorry. So we can keep functioning as an island. Otherwise, we're just gonna turn into something else in 5 years.
Yeah, the zoning was just approved last night. So we'll move forward with plans. The facilities director sent a check, or the planning sent a check to get the planning process done.
And I think the whole month, there was a reason.
Yeah, there was COVID came up at that point. A lot of construction had started, and then there was a sunset clause in the zoning ordinance as it relates to the 513, specifically for town-owned property that sunset as of December 31st, 2020. So we had to go back and change that zoning ordinance.
Which we did the other night. We removed the sunset, so that it's allowing it to move.
But that will move forward.
Hi, Chris.
I have a wanted to really reiterate what Chris Wood said. I agree with everything he said. I agree with what you said about taxes and the implication of taxes on failure, or particularly failure to affordability. I personally do not want to see a 2% tax on the property on Block Island until we look at other sources of funding. That's basically what our lobbyist said when he was here last Friday. He said you will do yourself so much better if you self-fund. And I said, I think we have identified sources of funding, and that there's a route to it. It means we constitute the land trust fee, and that can be done by simple legislation, but we will have to agree that that's what we want, that's what the island wants. And specific to that, the land trusts wrote a letter in the paper responding to what I had submitted, and this Friday will be a response to them. And I really, again, challenge the land trusts to, especially the Washington Land Trust, to really think about what they're doing and how they're contributing to this problem of affordability, however unintended, and to try and work themselves into the future, because without a sunset provision, if they don't change themselves by their own recommendations, they'll be changed from the outside. And I don't think that's what it could be a constructive dialogue. So it would be best if the land trust really start looking at this, taking what we've said to heart and come back with some real ideas. Thank you.
Well, there's to say, as both Chris's have spoken so well. I've often brought this up too. And Chris, myself, and anybody else who addresses the conservation groups, as I recall, every single one of us can hug a tree with the best of them. We embrace conservation. We applaud the conservation group for what they have done and what they continue to do. But this community is evolving. And there has to be a different mindset on just how we're approaching these subjects we're talking about. Keep in mind, when someone does address a conservation group, it's more out of respect than anything else. No affordable housing project has been done on this island without some conservation group intervention. Whether it's waiving the fees, part of the land being, having a certain easement to it, whatever. So they will continue to be allies. And they also have to keep in mind just what Chris said, we are evolving. So we have to evolve with it. And I know it's corny when I say people conservation, but that's what we gotta start focusing more on, as opposed to land.
Thank you, Seth.
Okay, so first of all, I appreciate everybody's input tonight. I think we're all quote unquote in violent agreement. One of the things that has somewhat frustrated me over the last few weeks and months is we have these meetings, we get all the minutes done, thank you, Billy. We get it all moving and we don't necessarily go very far. I'm really excited about the planning board Monday, Wednesday, hope that everybody will go. The one area that continues to be a bit of a struggle is on rental housing. I think we all just talked about how important that is. I would love to figure out a way, and I know Rosemary has talked with some consultants. We've talked with Josh Saul from Commerce, and I would love to figure out a way to find and identify a leader to really help us out with this whole rental housing issue. And for those who don't understand or aren't aware, it's really a lot around the funding. It's really a lot around how do we make rental housing work? A little bit about public partnership. If we have the land, great, but how do we do these 7 units or 8 units or whatever it's going to be? And I believe, should we be interested, there potentially maybe the land trust can help, the housing board can help. I think this is really helping the housing board with resources I think based on some of the conversations, Josh Saul may be very engaged. So I would, once the budget comes out, I really would love to, the council to work with Land Trust for some funding, work with Housing Board for some funding, work with Josh Saul for funding, and figure out how do we get a person or a consultancy that really can help lead us in this quickly, that can jumpstart us. And my hope would be in 45 days, 60 days, that we can really talk about solidifying that, assuming that all the boards and everything's comfortable. But right now, we've got a model for ownership housing. We clearly have a lot of dialogue about 513s. That's happening. The rental housing is still a bit of a conundrum. And I think we need somebody to help us raise our game. And so I would love to talk to the council about it more, have some informal conversations, but I think we can find enough money to hire somebody or work with Josh and help fund that person to really bring the game up on this rental housing. We own the land of Paul O'Brien. If there's a way, ownership housing on another, split this thing up, how do we jumpstart this? And my hope would be to do that as soon as the state budgets are all set, which is in, like we said, 30 days.
It's a good idea, but it's the essence of what we've been already talking.
Yeah. And getting local funding.
So hold on a minute, you guys hang on. Cindy, wasn't that on housing board meeting when you have, did you have a volunteer? That was gonna assist with assist with design, maybe I misunderstood.
Yes,
And
that's
then
just
they-
architectural.
Okay.
I think what Sven is alluding to, describing is really the whole process of creating allies with the state, with Rhode Island Housing, figuring out how we can be competitive in the quest for funding. Because when we look at the rental model, it does require a significant infusion of cash. We need to have some significant funding. And to get through that, a consultant would be a great help to kind of shepherd us through that process.
You're talking about design, somebody to help with design.
No, it's really, it's more, I mean, we're working on design, but then you have to essentially present your program to the state.
Yeah.
Present the designs, present your financials and request funding. It's not an easy process, and it's extremely competitive, even though we're really excited because the promise of funds are out there. But then we have to get the attention of the state and be a successful candidate to receive these funds. So having someone who has the connections, has done these types of projects before, knows where the pitfalls are and how to get us through the process is what I believe Sven was talking about.
I think it's something to wait for everyone.
Yeah, it's their job.
Some of the execute what is being,
Exactly.
what is
That's
being
the
done.
housing.
And it's not, not only is it the funding source, which is critical, but it's also the that public-private partnership, finding the types of developers that are geared up to build these projects, that understand the state credits that are out there.
Sure. So anybody else have any comments on this time? Keith Lewis?
I just want to follow up on what Chris has said, and you did acknowledge this point, but I want to repeat it. On the matter of affordable housing, let me emphasize that the island conservationists are generally supportive of affordable housing. After all, we live here too. And most of us have supported affordable housing with our time and money. I mean, my wife and I were middle-class people living on a fixed income, and we made major donations to the affordable apartments. And I had done with Cindy and Keith Lang back in the beginning. We got the funds from the Champlain Foundation to buy the land, the underlying land for Beacon Hill. Well, Beacon Hill, land. So I just want to make that. And now, I also just want to say, in 1986, I was involved in lobbying for the legislation that created the Block Island Land Trust. We were lobbying as volunteers and had strong opposition, and were at the State House almost every day for 6 months. And so now there was some who are advocating. I just want to warn you that that is a dangerous thing to do. Others start tinkering with it. You don't know what the end result will be. Block Island might lose the whole ball. So anyway, when we were lobbying for the legislation, we were the only ones that prevailed. Other towns introduced legislation that was similar to ours, but we were the only one that prevailed. I'm aware of Little Compton, but that was a somewhat such a different situation. And so we're also the envy of other towns and organizations around the country. During my intensive volunteer years, I did a lot of networking around the United States. I did that to learn. But when people heard I was from Block Island, they wanted to know how we did it. They clearly envied us because we had to shoot 8 legislation. I was happy to tell them, but I was also rather sad because I knew how hard the task is. I knew it would probably be impossible for them to obtain such legislation. So in closing, I just want to say that I truly believe the island would be gone by now if we didn't have that unique legislation that gave us the power of the transfer of people. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Closing? Anybody else want to comment? Anything that's not on you.
Thank you.
House. Then, we have marching orders. I don't want anybody to leave the room tonight thinking that we're stuck on a bureaucratic mess. So I kind of want to know, I just like, this, the funnel, funnel's gonna get smaller and smaller as it happens to the next. So we're gonna compile a list of concerns and what we're doing and the way we're working toward. We'll throw that out there obviously in minutes. And I just will continue the discussion, but I really want, if there's any more comments on us that we may discuss tonight, I want to give everybody an opportunity to voice them.
I just
Not
think,
you.
I think it's important for everyone to concentrate on how to work together. We all have the same goals. It's important to communicate and work together.
And that's, yeah.
And I would say also participation, that everybody's been here. Monday, Wednesday are big nights planning board, because that's where it starts. I mean, it sort of starts the planning. And then comes to everybody, so making sure they hear your opinion, everybody's opinion. Yes, I know.
Monday, we have 2 items on the agenda. We have the large house ordinance, and just the amendment that Chris Warfel submitted for section 513. And then Wednesday, we have a very full agenda with public hearings that always go first. So I just wanted to mention that. It's pretty eliminated.
Time of the meetings.
And people are always welcome to submit comments in writing too. You can't either send an email to them and the planning board would receive that. Okay, so
4 o'clock.
I'll just make my sort of semi-regular plea that planning board meetings are too important to be held at 4 o'clock when people are working. They should be held at night when people can get there.
David Lewis.
May I ask a quick question about the 2 agendas, Monday and Wednesday? 513 amendment seems to be on both agendas. Can you tell us the distinction between what's going to happen Monday and what's going to happen Wednesday with regard to that?
Well, the planning board has to act within 45 days for the the ordinance, so we have a special meeting on Monday and then a regular monthly meeting on Wednesday, so I put on both.
So
This is
I guess your hope is that whatever happens Monday doesn't get repeated on Wednesday. That you're continuing furthering moving the language forward, so you have something to report to the council shortly thereafter.
by June 2nd.
Right, thank you.
Yeah, so maybe the planning board, most of the discussion could be Monday and then be able to act on it on Wednesday, finalize their recommendation to then send that to the town council. And it would also then be, of course, on the town council's agenda.
I guess the planning board will need a little bit more time.
Chris, one. Question. The town planner did submit comments back on what we had submitted. I'm wondering if those are.
They're on,
Right.
perfect.
Okay, would it be?
It's the planning site though, right? Planning one's it?
Well, you go to clerk base when you go to the town council agenda, yeah, and then it's.
Everybody else, you know, a lot of people find their face for this.
So if you go to the homepage on, for the town website, it says access to, minutes,
Yes,
agendas,
that's
like,
what
click on that and it'll take you to clerk base. On the left-hand side, you'll see town council, planning board, zoning board, historic district commission. Click on planning board, and you'll see, the agendas, and then you open that, you'll see something highlighted in blue, and that will, you have a PDF of that topic.
I'm wondering for efficiency, so everyone is as important as possible when they come to the meetings. And they can read the way it's submitted. Pretty posted, to the whole board to move that, but with the town planner has done it, I know it's on the town website for case. But they also put out another way that's more accessible. Yeah, is that legal, is that from a problem? I'm just saying so people can read.
For share it.
Yeah, it's okay.
We
I
share
didn't
it
know
on
that was
the,
okay.
it's a
Public document.
It's in
Public
town hall.
document.
We'll do that. I just want to have permission.
Yeah.
And I do want to clarify that the planning board has been discussing amendments to the 5-13 ordinance, last, yeah, it started last year. I think, it was tabled, we're talking about it when there's time, I guess, but anyway, the ordinance, the amendments, I guess Monday and Wednesday are more focused on what was submitted to the town council and referred to them. Some things overlap, and I'm sure the broader discussion will happen, but the documents that we're talking about that were posted aren't all of what has been, all the work that's been done and all the amendments that have been considered and are still on the table. So that's kind of, this is a smaller piece, I guess, a separate process that started. Just to clarify that, so I'm interested in all of this other memos and draft conversations that are in the file.
Anybody else? Comments, concerns? I remind everybody, honor their mothers on Sunday, Mother's Day. I am doing I will be spending the day with my son's mother. We are going away, so I will not be here on the planning board meeting on Monday. So if you don't see me there, this is the reason why. First one will not be at that very important meeting. I just want to let it out there now that I will not be at that meeting.
No wonder why that's there.
Mother's Day. So take it from away from Mother's Day. And that's just don't want anybody to forget their mothers on Mother's Day. Anyone else? Motion to adjourn? Second, motion. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Sven.
It's like there, you know, we've created a problem, I mean, it's a beautiful problem. It's now a problem.
All right, I'll talk to my husband.